Welcome to Tea Talks, where young adult stories and church experience blend into a beautiful insight to inspire us. So grab a cup of tea, sit down, relax, and enjoy as we spill the tea. And today I have with me my good friend Chris. Chris and I go way back. We worked together before, so I'm so excited to have you here because now other people are going to get to know you.
It's
so
a pleasure
Chris,
to be here.
Yes, welcome. So let's start because not everybody knows you. I know you, but not everybody. So let's start. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
So I've been in North Carolina most of my life. My father was in the U.S. Marine Corps, so we traveled around the world a lot. We lived in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for about 2 years, and then we had a tour in Okinawa, Japan for about 6.5. And then he retired at a small little town called Camp Lejeune. For those who don't know where that's at, it's about 4 hours west of the Charlotte area. Lived there most of my life, and then eventually moved to Raleigh, which is where I met Pastor Chris, and then eventually moved to Charlotte, and that's where the new journey begins, I guess.
This is so amazing. I mean, I knew you lived in Japan because you told me that before, but I didn't know you lived in Cuba too. It must be amazing growing up, going to all of these different places.
Yeah, it's been a little stressful sometimes because it seems like once you settle in one area, you make new friends, you have to transition to somewhere else. But it was definitely a great experience for sure.
I'm sure my kids can relate to you because your father in the Marine and my kids as children of pastor kids, they unfortunately have to go through that too. They didn't like that too much. But I think as an adult, now they appreciate all the cultures that they were exposed to, so it's a different appreciation now. But as a kids, they did not like it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Chris, we are doing this series inspired in this book called Growing Young, where the Fuller Institution, they're researchers. They wanted to know what was happening that we are losing so much of our young adults, by they get to a certain age. Actually, research showed that 1 year after they graduate high school, they're gone out of the church.
Wow.
That is about 50% of the young adults. So they started looking at it, okay, basically they decided not to focus on what they're doing wrong, but they decided to see, okay, the churches that are doing well, they're thriving with young adults, what are they are doing right. And they came up with 6 characteristics, and one of them is empathy, empathizing with young adults today, understanding their world and how much that make a difference. What would you say is the greatest struggle for a young adult today and church life?
I can't speak for the general population, but I guess speaking for myself, one of the things I struggle with the most growing up in the church, and me growing up in the Camp Lejeune area, for those who may not know, in Jacksonville, North Carolina, we have a very small church, and the demographics is mostly retired people. It's mostly elderly. So when I was about 19 years old, the next youngest person was probably about 50. And so there was no relatability, let alone empathy. And so everyone was relating to me on a level which they're able to relate to, which in a sense, there was just no similarities, there was no empathy, no connection. And so I wasn't able to relate and connect with the church as a young person. I wasn't able to connect with, and then my association with the church was really how I associated it with God as well. And so it really gave me perhaps a false perception of the Bible and God in general, because right after high school is when I really started to search the Bible and really search for truth and trying to understand our relation and dynamics with God and the Bible and what our purpose is in this world, especially as a 19-year-old going to college. And so I didn't really immediately find that at the church, which is why around that time I actually left and was searching for about a year before coming back.
Why do you think churches struggle so much to understand young people? Why do you think the older generation struggles so much?
I don't think it may be a struggle as not understanding as much as wanting to try to relate. I think about, I have 2 nephews, and I know oftentimes when they were younger, they would frustrate me with some of the things they would do. I remember when my youngest nephew was in kindergarten, his teacher would call and just complain about some of the things he would do in school. And I'm like, why in the world would he do that? And I remember one time he had told me he got in trouble because apparently he told a kid that he had a funny looking face. And I said, why would you tell the child he has a funny looking face? You don't do that to people. That's not nice. And he says, well, Tio, doesn't the Bible say that you'll know the truth and that the truth will set you free? And of course, I didn't know what to say to that, right? And so as a child, relating to the scriptures and relating to how he understands and sees the world was very different from the way I saw it. And so I noticed that for me, I was like, okay, you know what? Let me try to put myself in his shoes and at his level to try to understand how he sees the world. And I think that not just the older people, but even younger people, if we could try to change our perspective and try to see the world through their lens instead of trying to see the world through a magnifying glass, we'd be able to relate at a different level and dynamic. And so I think it's a matter of not understanding, but trying to understand the other person's perspective.
We're probably never going to be able to completely understand,
No.
but it is trying.
Yeah,
I like
right.
that. I like that, and I like the example that you gave about your nephew. It's like sometimes we look at our kids and like, why?
Right.
But trying to put ourselves in their world, which is, there is a huge gap in every generation. There has always been a gap between the older generation and the younger generation. Do you think this generation has a bigger gap? Do you think this society, this culture has made a bigger gap than the generations before?
I wouldn't say maybe a bigger gap. The age demographics is probably the same. I'm a millennial, and my nephews, of course, are Gen Zers, I guess. So I think today's society is bombarded with so much more traffic, so much more knowledge, with social media.
That's where I was going to. If you think that the social media and everything that is happening has created a bigger challenge and even a more distance between the generations.
I think so, and the access to information is so much more accessible today than it ever was before. Even me growing up, right? I'm not that old, but even growing up with social media and other things, it wasn't as bombarded as it is today. And oftentimes the information that we get access to is not only at a much faster rate and pace, but it's also so much more different information coming at someone all at one time. And it causes a lot of confusion. And so trying to say, okay, where do I fit into society when the world is telling me I need to be this, the church is saying I need to be that, the Bible is saying this, Instagram is saying that. It causes grand confusion, I believe. And then I believe as a result, it's creating greater distance because today I feel like a lot of the younger people are able to relate to that level, or as maybe the boomers and millennials or Gen Zers and everyone else relates to the level how they understand and perceive the world when they were growing up. And so we're pulled in every different direction instead of trying to try to find commonality, I guess. And instead of building bridges, we're building firewalls. And I think social media, what we're exposed to on television, peer pressure, all that stuff plays a part and are factors, I believe, in shaping in who we are and in the decisions and choices we make in life.
Another thing that kind of bothers me too is that, and by the way, I was guilty of it. Okay, like I remember when TikTok and Instagram started becoming like popular, they had a lot of videos making fun of the millennials, and it doesn't help when we already have a gap in generation, when we have always this conflict, and when instead of trying to understand them, we make fun of them. It definitely doesn't help. How did you overcome, let's say that time that you were 19 and you were struggling with faith, struggling being able to be part of the church, you even left the church. How did you get back? How did you overcome that situation?
I think there's two big things for me. I can't speak for everyone else, but one is, even though I might have left the church, I was still connected with God. I still had a lifestyle of prayer. I was still staying in God's word. I was visiting different churches. So my constant connection with the Lord, and I would say it wasn't so much me as much as God staying connected with me. God will orchestrate circumstances in my life to always bring me full circle back to Him. And the second thing was community. I remember I was struggling a lot in my younger years in college spiritually, and I remember I was praying to the Lord, God, please send me people that I can connect to, that I can relate to, that can help me to navigate through life in general. I can't, as a 19-year-old, I couldn't associate with a 55-year-old. I was very active. I was involved in wrestling and weightlifting, other sports and stuff like that, and so I really enjoyed that. And it was around that time that when I was at Camp Lejeune area, they had a young Marine by the name of Joe. We still stay in touch. He was about 24, 25. He was a little older than I was. And he was a mentor to me. And so he was big into the gym. He was big into martial arts and other things. And so I was like, oh man, okay, I could kind of relate to this guy. But he was also very spiritual, had a solid foundation in the Bible and God. And so every week we would do Bible studies, we would hang out, but we would do other things outside of just church and spirituality. We had other things that we were able to relate to. And a third element too, I had older people that mentored me, that really believed and invested in me. And I think that was a big thing that kind of pulled me back into a church. There was a pastor that said, hey, I want to get you involved in certain things. And he entrusted me. He wanted to make me, give me a position in the church, which I didn't think at the time I was ready for. And to this day, I don't, in my 20s at that time now, fast forwarding it, he wanted to be an elder and this and that. I was like, I can't do that. I have no idea what that even means. I don't even go to church that often. But he believed in me, he invested in me, and he would have me go with him on visits. And him just not only showing that he cared about me, but showing that he also believed in me is what really motivated me to say, what, I really want to do better in my walk with God, because I didn't want to let them down. And so those were three factors, I think, that really kind of not only kept me, but also helped to pull me back into that Christian community.
Relationship, mentorship, those I believe those are key ingredients to be able to have a community where young adults want to be in, and prioritizing the young people. When we say prioritize the young people, it's not in the sense of we only care for the young people. No, we care for all generations. But the research shows that a church that focuses on young people, it helps all generations. Isn't that amazing? Have you experienced anything like that from the different churches that you start going? How did the intergenerational relations play a role in the whole church becoming more a warm and welcoming church? How did you have experience like that?
I have, and I would say probably more than one on different levels. When I was in Raleigh, I think one thing that I really liked about the community church I went out there is that the older people did not, in a sense, bash the younger people over the head with the Bible and point out everything they were doing wrong and everything they were not doing right. On the contrary, they not only invested in them, but they also wanted to learn from them. And I think when they started doing that, it opened up our hearts and minds to say, okay, you know what? Let me listen to what they got to say now. Not because, in a sense, they were older, or because they were more experienced, or because they were giving us the 9 to 5 on the scriptures and what it says, but because they actually invested and wanted to take the time to understand and know us. It really, in a sense, opened our hearts and minds to want to know and understand them. And so, as you said, building that relational dynamic and also that mentorship created a community. And so, I look at church too. Even in the book of Acts, we see it wasn't so much a church as we think of an organization or a division or a building, but it was a community of believers coming together in one accord. It didn't mean that they all saw things the same way. They're all very different people with different cultural backgrounds, but one thing they had was love for one another. And in seeing that love is not only what really drew me to the church, but it drew me closer to God. I was like, wow, this must be what the presence of God must feel like, because I've never experienced this much love and camaraderie anywhere else before. And so, and that's something I think all of us can give. We may not have to know the Bible and everything that it says, but we can have love for one another. And Jesus said, by this will all men know you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. And so I think that's what really helped me and helped the other young people as well, to kind of stay knit and to be able to extend that, because I think for me, it's when we experience that love, we become natural extenders of it. And so we
Yes.
become extensions of that love. And oftentimes, if we experience the opposite, right, hurt people, but loved people also love people. And so I think that's something that we need to see more of.
Yes, and like you're saying, like in the book of Acts, they were not perfect. You continue reading, and they still continue making a lot of mistakes. But I think it's the consistency, stay there, be patient, love each other, and even though problems are going to come, they are still together.
Right.
How do you see yourself replicating what this community that you were able to find?
So one thing I really wanted to do, because I had many people invest in me as a young person, one thing I want to do is to pay it forward. And I've been asking God and praying, God, well, how do I do that? How do I take that which I experience and able to give that to other people? And so, at our community church, when I was in Raleigh, I really wanted to get involved with young people. And so what I did was I prayed. I asked God, give me something to be involved in. I want to be involved in community. I want to be able to be a mentor. And it doesn't mean you have to know everything or anything, right? I didn't feel like I did, but you look in the Bible, Jesus chose fishermen to be the representatives of the gospel. He chose Judas to be the treasurer, who was the one who was a thief. And so it really made me realize I wanted to serve God at a greater capacity. And I tell you, when you pray, things happen. And God started bringing young people to our church. We had some, maybe some may be able to relate. We had a couple that were atheists that didn't even believe in the Bible or God. We had some that had Hindu backgrounds and some that were Buddhists. We had people of all different belief systems. But one thing I realized, we built a community of friendship and relationship. We would do like hiking trips, and we would go on other events that were not so much related to church. And it was there that we built this camaraderie, built this relationship dynamic to where they were able to ask questions. And several of them have gotten baptized, two of which are actually Christian leaders now. And they're themselves at 21, 22, leading out in Bible studies and organizing events all on their own. And that is only by the work of the Holy Spirit. And so I think that once God takes us by the reins, God then also equips us and ordains us for ministry. It doesn't mean you have to be a minister of the gospel, but wherever we are at, God has called us to be ministers for Him. And so I hope and pray that I could be used at any capacity. And God is still teaching me. Yes. The more I'm learning, the more I'm unlearning. The more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. But I think that's the beauty of the gospel and reality.
The priesthood of all believers. Amen. God called all of us to be missionaries for Him. I love that. And this, what we're doing right now, it is actually to try to create this welcoming and warm communities where young adults want to be part of it. I am so glad we had this opportunity to talk and for you to share your story. And I hope we can do this again at some point. So sure. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yes, appreciate it.
And thank you for joining Tea Talks. I ask you to continue stirring up the conversations and embracing the beautiful and the messiness of life. And until next time.